welcome back to another new edition of Windows on Current Affairs. And today in Windows on Current Affairs, we're going to be taking a more comprehensive look over the African-Egyptian, one of the most important, one of the most priorities for Egyptians right now, which is the African-Egyptian partnership. Of course, when we talk about the African-Egyptian partnership, it comes to your mind youth as a first priority. Yes, it's youth. We're going to talk about youth once again, and youth in the sense of partnership between the African nations and Egyptian youth. And we have with us here Yara Ouda. She's an African youth volunteer at the African Union headquarters, especially when it comes to, again, Egypt assuming the chairmanship of the African Union and its impact over the partnership between youth issues in different African nations and Egypt, and the collaborations and the different programs for empowering and enforcing youth in African nations. What is Egypt presenting for those African nations? Of course, in addition to the World Youth Forum, the different platforms in which both sides are collaborating for empowering and enforcing youth. We're going to talk about the most common issues or the most common interests between the African nations youth and the Egyptian youth, the most common priorities of the sustainable development when it comes between Egypt and the African nations, in the sense of women empowerment, women and child empowerment, in the sense of climate change, in the sense of different developmental issues and concerns and challenges at the same time. We're very delighted to be having with us Ms. Yara Ouda, and she's an African youth volunteer at the African Union headquarters. Good evening, Yara.
Good evening, Dina. Thank you so much.
Of course, you worked for the African Union Youth Volunteer Course. You joined in for almost a year and a half or 2 years. Talk to us in brief about it. How did exactly it started, and what exactly were you doing during that mission in Addis Ababa?
First of all, I graduated from Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University. So my passion drove me to participate in different activities and different working experience until I found my passion to work on a continental level in Africa. So I joined at the beginning Ministry of Youth and Sports in the Bureau of the African Youth Bureau, where I started to volunteer to attend as an organizer and a reporter in different African events in Cairo. One of them was Batch 7 under the African Union Youth Volunteer Corps program, which is a program that gives the chance for youth to go and to get deployed for 1 year in different African country rather than their homeland. So at that time, I proved myself.
What exactly are youth assigned to do in that program?
So you go for a training in another African country. I went in Ghana for this training, and then you have preferences and you go for interviews with the recruiters responsible for the EUIVC program. And at that time they chose me to be deployed in Addis Ababa, where the headquarters of the African Union. So each youth actually has his role in different fields according to his preferences and his studies. So for me, as long as I studied political science, I studied policy levels, therefore I wanted to work on the youth development on the policy level in the African Union. So in the African Union, when I started, I went as a technical assistant to the Commissioner for Human Resources, Science and Technology, Her Excellency Professor Sarah Agbur, and working on that level, on this high level with the Commissioner was very beneficial for me as a young lady that can interact with the Commissioner, that can give her opinion, that can think outside the box. So it was really very useful for me, and I attended different missions outside the African Union as well. So after that, I wanted to get more in specific in the youth development, as we are youth, and I feel that we all know that the majority of the population in the continent is youth, and this continent is going to be driven by us. not by anybody else.
Of course.
So at that time, I got in specific, more concentrating into the Youth Development Division. And from here, I started to work on the youth policies on a continental level, where the African Youth Charter, where the plan of action of youth empowerment. So all these documents or booklets are guidelines for the governments, are guidelines for the member states, for their national policies concerning youth. And when I talk about youth, it's not only youth as an individual, it's youth in health, youth as a population, youth in peace and security and his role, youth in infrastructure, youth as an entrepreneur, youth in education. So here youth, the policies for me are concerned all the fields. You can't find one department without youth implementing or youth contributing in the department.
Right.
So for me, it seems to be like one perspective. However, it's working in all fields. So if I graduated from political science, so I used to work on youth as labor, as free movement, as young entrepreneurs, in education, so on policy level. Besides that, I also proved myself that I went on different missions under the Bureau of the Chairperson to attend retreats and to attend the summit itself of the African Union, where all member states, the ambassadors of the member states and the presidents attend. So you get in touch with them, you understand how on the high level countries mobilize, not only youth, mobilize everything, all the national level gather at the same time during the summits for the sake of the Africa we want.
Okay, so that also coincided with Egypt assuming the chairmanship of the African Union. It was such a great opportunity for you as one of the Egyptian youth, prominent Egyptian youth, to be able to embark over that golden opportunity and to be able to join the joint projects between the African Union and different projects in Addis Ababa. How did it work? First of all, explain to us. You were situated in Addis Ababa and Egypt assumed the chairmanship of the African Union, and President Sisi gave an overwhelming speech over there. And how did it happen? How did the African nations receive that? Egypt retaining its lead role back in the region.
All right, so I was glad that when I joined before Egypt becomes the chair, and then I joined during the entire period when Egypt is chairing until now. So in both situations, Egypt's agenda is focusing on Africa. Not like in the past. No, now our agenda is really focused in Africa, in all fields. Not only.
We're going to talk about the priorities later on, but we would like to get a full image from you about how the African nations received Egypt as assuming the chairmanship, especially that they voted for Egypt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I can reflect for you how my colleagues were describing that. They see Egypt is very powerful, and that it's a great pleasure for the African Union to be chaired by Egypt, and not only Egypt, by our president, His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So at that time, people were just waiting, and they were having some thoughts about what's going to be the agenda of Egypt in Africa. Is it water resources? Is it diseases? Is it health? Is it education?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and even us, like, okay, so what are the main priorities of Egypt? And what we discovered during the 1 year is that Egypt focused on everything.
That is going to take us on the same question that you are urging to.
Actually, they were very eager.
The African nations were wondering what could be the priorities on the Egyptian agenda, not on our agenda. And they were really surprised and amazed that the chairman of the AU was focusing on the same interests and the same concerns the African nations were focusing on. So they were not disappointed. They were delighted.
They were delighted, and actually they expected too much effort from Egypt, because we're strong in the region, whether on the African side or the Arab world. Also, they consider that Egypt is one of the most stable country concerning peace and security and fighting terrorism. Also, they consider that the Egyptians themselves that work in the African Union are brilliant. So they were delighted because we are known for our hard work, for our dedication, for our stability in our political status quo, for our good economy, for us being champions in different fields. So I believe that the image at that time was reflecting very positive feedback from the other African colleagues, and which is what's happening now. Like, the image didn't differ a lot since the beginning until now. Now they are happy that Egypt didn't fail them down.
What were the priorities for the Egyptian chairperson or the chairmanship of Egypt? What were the priorities of the agenda of the Egyptian side concerning the African Union?
So in January summit for 2019, when we received our chairing to the chairmanship of the African Union, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussed many priorities concerning reinforcing peace and security in the continent, free trade, free movement for labor, for services, and also one of our contributions for 2019 is that we ratified the African Continental Free Movement Agreement, and we reached the agreement itself reached to be signed by 52 African countries. So it's already it's starting to be all the African countries have to abide by it, or the African countries that ratified the agreement. Also, one of the priorities was infrastructure projects, decreasing diseases in the continent, and also Egypt contributes in that they send Egyptian doctors to Sudan, to Ethiopia, to any other to the countries that have diseases problems. Also, part of our priorities is entrepreneurship and the small SMEs, and how can they do free movement of young entrepreneurs, as well as the youth on the agenda. Here in Egypt, we have youth as a priority for the government, so as well they focused on youth empowerment in the African Union. They focused on FGM, they focused on everything. So in every department they focused on what are the problems that the African Union is passing through and how can they solve it. Not only that, they also focused on the administrative reforms in the African Union. Recently there are reforms in the African Union concerning finance, administration, recruitment, which is for me positive direction, because we all need fair representation of the countries, in particular in the recruitment system, so that we have more Egyptian employees in the African Union, and that each country has its own quota. And what we discovered is that Egypt's representation in the African Union is under quota concerning the number of employees there. So we're looking forward that in the next years, or starting from this year, that our quota would be full and would be fair enough like the other African countries.
Right. Yara, you as the AUY VC shared the program with the AU. Talk to us about your experience sharing this program, and what was the name of the program?
So my experience, like, I can tell you, like, the experience was personal, social, and professional experience.
Which one would you like to start off with?
I can say the personal first, because it was a challenge. As a young lady, I stayed abroad for 1 year and a half. Even with, I've participated before in different exchange programs, and I've traveled before. However, Addis Ababa, as a country where there is the African Union headquarters, all the liaison offices of the United Nations, GIZ, all the international organizations are there. So it's a busy country. At the same time, it's passing through challenges as well, whether politically, ethnically, economically. So I've lived in the country. It was a little bit hard to settle in the first couple of months. So this taught me lots of self-confidence, self-awareness. So it was a different environment than working in your country, definitely. This is from my personal perspective, and I think I changed a lot. Maybe my friends can say that. Also on the social level, even if we meet with foreigners or with our African friends or foreigner friends in Egypt, it's different when you live with them. So in the African Union, it has 55 African countries employers or employees. So every day you deal with different people from different countries, and in every country they are different. So you have to be diplomatically enough, you have to be sometimes politically enough because you're working in a political institution. You have also to reflect your own culture there in the African Union. So it was a big challenge that you find maybe your leaders, the three of them are from different countries. So it was a great experience that you can deal with different mindsets.
So you have acquired different cultural experiences also as well.
Yes.
Because it's very obvious to everyone that African nations have multilateral cultural backgrounds, and it's very rich when it comes to the African nations. But also, if you would like to talk about the professional level as well.
Yeah.
Don't forget it.
I was just going to start. Yeah. The experience itself was intense professionally. I worked on the high level, on the normal level, which is the us as youth. So I worked with ambassadors, I worked with commissioners, with heads, with youth. So I mean, on different levels, you gain experience from the expertise, and you gain experience from the young people by being creative, by giving space to think. So it was worth experience. Also working on the policy level, it's not only working on a national policy level. You're working on the continental policy level. How can this policy feed into the interest of 55 African member states? So you're not only speaking as Yara as an Egyptian. Egypt is inside your heart. You have a national interest, yes. But at the same time, you would like the other African countries to develop because they are our neighbors. All of them are our neighbors. If there's a problem even in the south of the African continent, Egypt is going to be affected by it. So it was broadening my mindset of how to work on the policy level on a continental level. Also on an international level and also on a regional level, I worked with the RECs, the Region Economic Communities in Africa. I worked with as well the Youth Envoy. I was a coordinator for her, Ms. Shibbi in Addis Ababa. So this was a youth level. I worked with also I mean, different actors, even with UNECA, which is United Nations Economic Commission, Economic Commission in Addis Ababa. I worked with the GIZ. So I mean, different actors. UN, for instance, they work on an international level. So when you sit on the same table with them as a young youth and you're monitoring what you have from policies and you're trying to reach a common ground, so this is an experience itself. So how can you feed the interest of all the actors around you and at the same time you're a winner? So this was for me the priority of my experiences in this part.
Right. You also stayed in Addis Ababa for almost a year and a half. How did you observe the difference between the African nations' eyes in African nations' eyes, different changes in Egypt, politically, economically, culturally, the soft power of the Egyptian administration, the assuming of the chairmanship of the African Union, AFCON, for example, this very huge African sports championship that took place in Egypt, and all that, because earlier in June 30th, the situation was totally different. Now, we could see the difference in their eyes, all the African nations, regardless of any other difficulties the whole nation is, the whole continent is passing through, yet we could clearly see admiration in their eyes. We could really see the collaboration, the sense of unity when it comes to the common interests and everything. So how did you observe Egypt's image in their eyes? The current Egyptian image.
So their treatment to me as an Egyptian.
Reflected how they
yes,
see
their treatment reflected, their treatment to me reflected their image to Egypt itself. So whenever I say I'm Egyptian, so I'm proud. People deal with you well. They see that your country is strong enough in the region. As soft power, all the African countries that speak Arabic as well. One of them is Sudan, Mauritania, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. So they have also our sarcastic, they watch our sarcastic movies. So they sometimes speak the same way you do. Also, I believe that I didn't face any problem that other African countries reflected to me towards my country. They were all friendly, and all of us were also strangers abroad. Each one wants to serve in Africa. So we were all helpful to each other. It was like a big group work or teamwork. Also, our embassy there, all the time, people feel like the embassy is very helpful. They even facilitate visas for people to go to Egypt. Even during the matches, yes, we were out, unfortunately, but we were also supporting other teams with our, and it was really confusing. Sometimes, like, who can I support? Like, is it Senegal? Can I support Tunisia? Who can I support? Because you feel that all of them are your friends. So I didn't feel any antagonistic vibe. And also, I guess also our generation forgot about like in the past when Egypt was a little bit far from Africa. But even when we were far, also we had good relations with the African countries.
But it's not there. I mean, the idea at Mubarak's time that Egypt was isolated from African nations, it's not there anymore. I mean, that spirit is not there anymore.
No, they forgot about
that
it.
reflects how the soft power of the Egyptian administration is working so hard, and how successful is it. In fact, what you're saying right now and explaining to us is that the situation and the image have totally changed, and how Egypt have succeeded in penetrating the modern African culture that real quick, in no time, and become that popular when it comes politically and economically and socially, also culturally, on all levels and all circles.
There's also a very good point that Egypt did to come back to the continent very quickly, which is that they started to hold different conferences and events, African events in Egypt. For instance, in Chairmanship, in Cairo, in Hurghada, in Alexandria. So this made more tourism from the other African nations to Egypt. And even sometimes my African friends, my other colleagues say, why didn't we approach Egypt before as a summer destination?
As a destination.
Exactly.
But also, since you have talked about this also, that is, I guess, that could be the time that we talk about the World Youth Forum. And the African or the APLP, African
I was just going to talk about that.
Presidential Leadership Program, and the 100 youth that were graduated this year, fresh African youth, and I've met them personally, and I held a symposium, and they were talking about themselves and their aspirations, and the joint Egyptian-African partnership, even in their future projects when they go back home. They were talking about Egyptian partnership, Egyptian-African partnership, Uganda, Addis Ababa. Most of the African nations were there students from there, and they were talking about their aspirations and their ambitions, and integrating the Egyptian partnership in every single project they are dreaming to achieve in the future. It was very clear that Egypt is there and successful and present. Talk to us about the impact of the APLP to the African youth where you stayed. How did they, were they looking for it? More youth were urged to join in for the next year?
Yes, our friends, we have some colleagues now in the batch, which is currently taking place. And they are very happy because it was a dream for them to discover Egypt, and many people had this stereotype that it's hard to come to Egypt. Maybe there is racism, maybe there is some restrictions concerning some African nations. However, all the stereotypes fell down.
The old-fashioned image were in the back of their minds.
Yes, and also the curriculum they have is very intense and very nourished with information and knowledge, and the role of Egypt and Africa, the role of the history of the African-Egyptian history itself, and how can they do partnerships with different African countries. Also, they are giving incentives or I mean hope for the youth, for the other African youth, that they can implement their own enterprises in Egypt, for instance. So this also...
That is true.
Yeah, they target free movement of students, for instance, to come and study in our universities. They target young entrepreneurs to collaborate with Egyptian entrepreneurs.
And civil society also. And
civil society as well. They also, which is for me the main reason behind the ALP, which is they try to focus on problems in the African countries and how can they solve it by themselves. Because the perspective of a Ugandan, for instance, is different from the perspective as an Egyptian. The problems of the north is different from the problems of the south, center, east and west. So how can we solve these issues in a teamwork or in a group work? And of course, also the African youth are not used to come and attend such forums or events in Egypt. So I feel that they are also eager. What's that? What's this program? What's it talking about? Why is Egypt doing this? What's the conclusion or the outcome of that? But I feel that the outcome is really positive. Like when I speak to my friends in any of the Egyptian programs here, they just say, yes, we're starting to have a new initiative between, for instance, Tanzania and Egypt. We're starting to have a group work. So here when you can say this is more African bond, which is not only the old way, which is the student exchange programs, it's also free movement of young youth to your country for small missions, so that you don't only
goals, which are the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Program.
Yeah, and also to achieve Agenda 2063, to achieve the prosperous developing continent, to reach as well, or to make something out of the dreams of the youth in the continent. So I feel like it's going to, the next batches are even going to be more better because you learn from the old batches. And every day we hear about a new project or a new collaboration or bilateral agreement between different African countries, in specific Egypt. So I feel that the continent is more dynamic and Egypt is in this wheel. Yeah.
Right. Since we have talked about the APLP, those youth going back home in the African nations, the African-Egyptian Developmental Partnership, and in particular the role of youth, they go back home and each of them have a mission to fulfill. After they have acquired their study, they have acquired the experience, the Egyptian African experience they have in the National Academy, where they are taught many important issues, and they go back home. How do you assess the African youth role in the region or in the continent after they go back home?
So,
In Addis Ababa, for example.
So we haven't yet met Ethiopians who came for training in the National Academy in Egypt. However, on a continental level, there should be kind of monitoring tools from the member states and from the African Union to monitor the role of youth in the continent in different fields. So I believe that, for instance, the Egyptian program is going to still be in connection with the different connections they have from youth, and start to mobilize resources if they need any help, if they need any partnership, if they need anything. So I believe that the monitoring tool is very important in Africa, and this is what the African Union is focusing on as well, to monitor the next steps of the youth and how much they progressed and how much they perceived from the knowledge they have taken, whether in Egypt or in any other African country. So I believe that even the Egyptians who took their training in the National Academy in Egypt, I believe that the networks are still there. So as long as the network is there, then the bond is there, then you still have connection with your colleagues to always initiate a project, to work in a project with another team. So I guess it's the connections itself, it's the monitoring tools, it's that if you need youth in a certain mission, you already have previous batches that you can choose the most pioneers among them to work and serve in the continent.
What are the most common challenges between Egyptian youth and Egypt and the Egyptian nations and its youth? They have we have 3 or 4 or 5 major challenges that we share with most of the African nations. From your own point of view and out of your own experience, working for one of the most popular programs there for youth, what are the most common challenges?
For the youth themselves? Fund is one of the most important challenges, because sometimes a young person can have a very good idea, but he doesn't know how to fund it. Second challenge is that I believe that it's the youth themselves. They have to move. They have to start by themselves. They should. There are some youth that they are not employed. However, they start small enterprises, and then we figure out that they became famous and they became well known in a certain industry, for instance. So I believe it's the youth themselves. If they don't have the spirit and they are not keen to start their own business or to push themselves, to increase their knowledge, to have a higher degree of education, to start to think about their national situation and the continental situation, then who else would do it? A third challenge is that the national policies and the continental policies, they should go align. Because sometimes the national policies in some fields might not be similar to the continental policies. So here you don't have similar goals. So here comes the role of the youth, that they should seek similar goals on both levels for policies, so that they can easily achieve what they want on the national level and then reflect on the continental level. Also, for the monitoring and evaluation system in the continent should be strong, because some youth until now are not recognized, and some youth they gain knowledge, but to start a project they maybe need coaching, they need mentorship. And also number 5, which is going to be very generic for me, vulnerables, marginalized youth, youth in health conditions, uneducated youth, gender-based violence for women, women who are subjected to violence every day, harassment, raping. All these issues might be, or not might be, they are barriers for youth to move ahead. Early marriage, FGM, all these issues in the continent might be a problem for the youth to move on. So here comes the national level and the continental level, when you can focus on the marginalized people because it's not only people in the center. You have to go to people who are vulnerable and start to use their skills, start to make a national, for instance, academy like we do. We have our youth forum, sometimes in Sinai, in Aswan, you engage all over Egypt in one program. So this should happen as well in different African countries. So if we don't have a healthy youth, educated youth, he will never innovate. He will never initiate work. So I believe that those might be obstacles wasting our resources, or I mean the nation's resources to invest in their youth.
Yara, Ouda, you are African Youth Volunteer at African Union Headquarters. Thank you so much.
Thank
Wish
you.
all the best of luck.
Thank you. It was nice
Thank you
time,
for
Dina.
coming.
Thank you so much.
Same here. And I guess this brings us to the end of this edition of Windows on Current Affairs. Many thanks to all of you. And until we see you again next week, that's a goodbye.